In the last video, we spoke about the similarities between GDPR and DPDP Act. In this video, we are going to talk about some of the differences between the GDPR and the DPDP Act. Welcome to my YouTube channel where you daily see new content on data privacy. And as I said, let's talk about some of the key differences between GDPR and DPDP Act. GDPR being applicable for Europeans and the Indian DPDP Act, of course, for India. So why do we actually need to even know them? There are many countries who have actually followed GDPR. Countries like Brazil, as it has followed GDPR, and GDPR being one of the initial regulations being implemented for some time, it's easy to take recommendations based on their experiences in deploying it, and then deploy your conditions. Again, taking reference to the experience they had while they deployed privacy regulations in their country. Also, if you want to spread your business internationally beyond the Indian geography, then, as I said, GDPR has been in use for many countries. So you never know. You might find reference to GDPR in any country where you're doing business. And if you're looking at any European country, then of course you need to be ready for GDPR. So it's important to know the similarities and the differences, and let's talk about the differences. For example, we start, and in this video, we are focusing more on the controller and fiduciary. So typically, controller for GDPR is a natural or a legal person, authority, agency, anyone who determines the purpose and means of processing the personal data, right? So anyone who determines the purpose and means of processing the personal data is a data controller. For GDPR, Europeans, for us, he is termed as data fiduciary, right? It could be any person, any company, any government agency, any agency, again, that determines the means and purpose of processing personal data. Fiduciary also lays down the conditions of how the data would be processed, and the data processor does it on their behalf. So controller controls the primary responsibility to ensure that the data is collected, processed the way GDPR guidelines do that. And fiduciary is the one whose obligations are pretty simpler as compared to GDPR, and maybe that's because we are starting off as of now. But then it's the same thing, that he is also responsible for how the data is being processed. Processed in Indian definition: collection, storage, usage, sharing with third parties, and deletion of personal data. Data protection obligations, transparency notices are required. They are required by both of them. Again, the key difference being that the DPDP Act currently, the fiduciary is not is expected to actually create a simpler, easy to understand notices. We are new to this, so not all audiences may be able to understand the notices properly. Data minimization and purpose limitation is very well defined when it comes to GDPR. It is well defined in Indian DPDP Act also for the fiduciaries, but it is again limited to the stated purpose, right? It does not directly talk of minimization. So when you talk of both of them together, you are saying that collect data only for the purpose and collect as minimum as required. And in Indian DPDP Act, when you are talking only of purpose limitation, you are saying collect only as per the purpose, at least for the purpose, right? Then accountability, of course, accountability is there at both the ends. Currently, fiduciaries in India are not mandated to keep a document of each and everything. Significant data fiduciaries, the one dealing with sensitive personal data, are required to, but not the general data fiduciaries. So that's a small difference between the two in terms of documentation. Then we talk of cross-border data transfer. You have adequacy decisions, you have standard contractual clauses and BCRs when it comes to the European Union, but when it comes to India, we are talking of saying that you should take a government approval whether you are allowed to transfer the data outside your country and to a particular country or not. Children data, it requires parental consent. Parental consent in India is mostly 16, in Europe is mostly 16 years, maybe lower in some part of the Europe. In India, the parental consent is 18 years, and we have a verifiable parental consent, which we'll talk about later in next few videos. The privacy by design is mandatory as a requirement documented under GDPR, but it's not explicitly mentioned in the Indian DPDP Act. Though you expect that you're really talking of managing privacy, then you should adopt privacy by design practices laid down by Dr. Anne Kawukian from the Ontario, Canada commissioner, right? So it's an old document, old principles that she laid down, and they are practical, and they work very good even till date. The basic logic being embed privacy in each and every process that you in your organization. So privacy happens automatically by design of every process. Then there's a legal basis of processing conditions. 6 lawful legal bases when it comes to GDPR: consent, contractual necessity, legal obligations, vital interest, public interest, legitimate interest. When it comes to the Indian DPP Act, presumptive legitimate uses. It's limited on legal grounds. Some more consent required there when you talk of legal basis of processing, but we are still not very detailed or strict about the legal basis of processing when it comes to DPDP Act. Consent should be freely given, specified, informed, unambiguous, explicit. When it comes to GDPR, it should be freely given or free saying, specific, informed, but with much more simplified mechanisms, as we call in Indian DPDP Act. And why there is a difference, though you say the need is the same. The difference is that the Indian DPDP Act mandates that there are supposed to be service providers to be registered as consent managers to work on behalf of a fiduciary. So fiduciary does not need to or should not have an internal consent management mechanism. It has to go outside. Legitimate interest controllers or the fiduciaries for GDPR can process data based on legitimate interest, overriding any subject rights, but there's nothing specific as legitimate interest when it comes to DPDP Act. Then we talk of rights of individuals. We have access, correction, erasure that you can do in GDPR. In DPDP Act, we talk of the same, but the procedural details are yet to be out. So data portability is allowed in GDPR. There's nothing specifically mentioned about that in DPDP Act. They're not saying that it's a right for you to get data portability. If your provider is okay with data portability, then it is fine. Automated decision making is another thing which is not very specifically mentioned in DPDP Act. It's more of a AI stuff. Let's first implement the basic privacy and then we'll look on to the add-on things. A right to object and restrict processing. Again, there's no equivalent direct user right when it comes to DPDP Act. And grievance vessel, yes, both the types there are. The DPDP board has to be a centralized enforcement mechanism. And in the GDPR, the data protection board or the data governance board for Europe is individual for every state. Every member state can have their own board, whereas in India, it's a central government functionality. The supervisory authority when it comes to compliance is Data Protection Authority, independent for each EU country that I mentioned previously also. In India, it's a central national authority, Data Protection Board of India. Breach notification within 72 hours. Significant data fiduciaries are expected to do breach notification. The exact timelines are yet to be finalized. Right? So the rules are out, but the timelines are yet to be finalized. It will take some time to do that. And with respect to enforcements, the fines and penalties there could be up to 4% of your global annual turnover. In India, it could be around 250 crore rupees. So in Europe, it could go to 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover. In India, it could go to 28 million euros, and depending on severity, but that's the maximum that can go ahead when it comes to Indian DPDP board. So these are the differences, the key differences between the GDPR and the Indian DPDP Act. I hope you like the content of my video. Please press the bell and the like icon, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share your feedback in the comment section. Thank you.